Hello, and welcome to the Over 50 Health and Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin English, founder of The Silver Edge. Our mission at The Silver Edge is to inspire men and women in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond to live their strongest, healthiest, most fulfilling lives. In this podcast, we share stories of amazing individuals who are doing just that, to help motivate you to become the healthiest version of yourself, regardless of your age. And now, on to today's podcast. Hello, my guest today is Dr. Serena Liu. Serena is a doctor of physical therapy in the Bay Area of California. She has spent the last 5 years working with the older adult population and has realized that even though we will all experience normal age-related changes as we get older, there are ways to combat these changes. She is on a mission to share her experience and knowledge about how to take control of the changes that come with aging and empower you to continue doing what you love, no matter your age or what you've been told before. She is the creator of the Instagram page @ResilientAging, where she shares action-oriented tips and ideas on how to age well with resilience, and has just released a free 4-week full-body workout program for all levels, no experience or equipment required. Serena, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. I'm glad to have you here. So we certainly want to talk about your work with aging adults, but why don't we back up a little bit and learn something about you? Can you tell us, what were you like as a girl?
Yeah, definitely. So we actually moved around a lot growing up. So my mom just loved to go and try out new cities and places. And so pretty much on the go every couple of years. And so a little chaotic, but got used to it. And always pretty active growing up. So let's see, I don't even remember, but I know in kindergarten, we would have these Olympic days, and you would do a 50-meter sprint or something like that, and all these things. And I remember I would always come home with a bunch of these medals and things like that. And so always pretty athletic, ended up playing soccer and touch rugby throughout high school. Ran a little bit of track, but not really into the running, just the run aspect of it. But yeah, and then went to college, and there actually wasn't any sort of club soccer team. And so there was actually a women's rugby, contact tackle rugby team. And I was like, oh, I played touch before, maybe I'll try this out. And came out the first day, and it was full chaos on the field, but I ended up loving it. And so I still play to this day. I play for a women's club out here in Berkeley, California. We're the Berkley All Blues. And it's been a little bit hard with the pandemic. Our season was canceled, and we're not really sure when we'll be back on the field. So just kind of managing with, lifting and continuing to work on fitness and small group gatherings, but, definitely missing that team aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like you've been active pretty much all your life and have been, looks like probably health conscious, with a little bit of, like you said, kind of running and soccer in high school. And then that's interesting. You played no touch rugby, and then in college, full contact, because I imagine that the two completely different sports.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about, you said that it was full on chaos that first day. Tell us a little bit about playing full contact rugby and how you've got, apparently it's a passion for you if you're still doing it, right?
Yeah, basically we had just this full team of pretty much new girls. There was 15 players on the field at a time, and we had maybe 5 or 6, girls that had played before, and then all of us freshmen that had never, really touched a rugby ball besides practice or done a lot of contact. And so the good thing was that, the other team probably had kind of that same amount of experience. We weren't really playing elite teams or anything like that. And so it was kind of just figuring out where you had to be and what to do. And I remember I got hit on my nose or something, and I was like, oh, this isn't great. But then, there's just so much adrenaline going on that you're just kind of like, okay, I'm fine, unless it's something really bad. And you just kind of, get over it and get up and keep going. Yeah. So played all throughout college, and we were, I think, in like D4 when we started, and we kind of bumped our way up to D2 when we left and went through a bunch of different coaches and kind of like built our program up. So that was really fun. And then when I started grad school, I actually stopped playing because I wanted to just, focus on school. And then when I graduated and started working, I really missed it. And so that's when I got back into it. And, I kind of looked up where kind of the best teams were in the US right now for women's. And so the Women's Premier League is kind of like the top level of play here in the US. And so there are 10 teams just around the US. And so Berkeley had one of them. And so I came out, and that was maybe 4 years ago, and kind of have been growing with them ever since. It's definitely, I've definitely learned a lot playing with, players with a lot more experience. And, we have national team players on our team as well. So it's been just a really great and awesome experience.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it. So, in addition to the rugby, do you have other conditioning or other exercises you do? Does the rugby team, how do they practice? Do they have like a strength and conditioning piece, or is it basically more skill-based stuff? What other physical activity goes into just besides playing actual rugby?
Yeah, definitely. So since rugby is a contact sport, we do a lot of strength and conditioning. So lifting, we're lifting probably like 2 to 3 times a week, kind of depending on the season. So in season, probably closer to two, and then off season, maybe like 3 or 4 times a week. And then we get together for practices 2 to 3 times a week as well. And so that can consist of, a lot of field work, skills, and also some conditioning can be thrown into that. And then the recovery piece is also really important. So, after a session, making sure we're getting the proper nutrition, getting enough sleep, and then even doing some, like mobility, like yoga or stretching, things like that to help us recover and be prepared for the next session.
That's great. I love to hear that. You're obviously very fit, and turns out your passion is working with older adults, right? So, in a physical therapy setting, talk to us a little bit about first what drew you to physical therapy.
Yeah, so growing up, I always wanted to do something in the medical field. And so I think my first idea was to be a pediatrician. And, getting older and being very active all my life, I was very interested in the human body and, how we move and anatomy and all that. And so, I kind of, was looking and seeing what kind of health professional would kind of work in that realm and touch on those aspects. And so then I found physical therapy, and it's like, oh yeah, this seems right up my alley. And so that was it.
And that makes sense given your background. What about how did you come to work with aging adults? Where did that piece of it come from?
So throughout school, we have three kind of like clinical rotations where you work in different settings for each one. And so one of them, I was working at a skilled nursing facility, and that was just the setting and the environment that I felt the most comfortable with and just had, the most enjoyment out of. And so when I graduated, I did travel physical therapy for a while, a couple of years, just to kind of, experience other environments as well and really kind of confirm that I wanted to work with the older population. And so, yeah.
Well, I found you on Instagram. You have a great Instagram account, by the way. It has a lot of personality and it's fun. I mean, I could see how some of that information could be conveyed dryly, but you have obviously some of your personalities coming through there. Talk to us a little bit about what your practice looks like today. What types of people are you seeing? What are they coming in for? And then we'll segue maybe into more specifically what you do for them. But what sorts of people are coming in and why are they coming?
Yeah, definitely. So I actually just had a recent change in my setting, but I'll kind of talk about both of them. So I had been working in a skilled nursing facility for 2 to 3 years. And so this population, so this is a like post acute setting. So people were coming to us after they had been admitted to the hospital and they weren't quite ready to go home and needed a little bit more rehabilitation, but weren't quite at the acute level where they needed intensive nursing care. And so they come to us at a skilled nursing or subacute facility. And so I was working with a lot of older adults that, had had a fall, fractured their hip or their back. They had, health complications like sepsis or heart failure and were admitted to hospital. And so they stayed at the hospital for a few days or, a week, and then they decided they weren't quite ready to go home. So then they would come to our facility. And so I would work with them on regaining their strength and their mobility so that they could go home and be safe when they're at home. And so I recently transitioned to working at a independent living facility. And so this is a facility where we have people that are living pretty much by themselves. They're walking around just kind of in a big community where they have resources like meals and community and activities that they can attend to. And it's a little safer for them because they don't really have to leave to do a whole lot. So they can kind of be in a safer environment. And there's also nursing care there as well, kind of like right at their doorstep. So I'm working there now and I see more mobile adults and I'm seeing them for chronic low back pain or if someone is starting to have falls, then I'm working with them and working and trying to figure out why are they having falls and working on addressing that so that they can be safe and continue doing everything that they want to do without that risk of falling.
Okay, so this is a more or less stable population. Then you're seeing a lot of the same people over and over. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you get to know them, you get to know their needs, et cetera, and obviously there'll be people leaving and coming.
Mhm.
Um, you had mentioned a couple of times things like, well, I guess in your previous position where you had people coming out of this acute care, and then you had mentioned later kind of falls and that being an issue. When we talk about why people come to physical therapy, especially older adults, what are you mentioned low back pain, you mentioned other things, but do you have folks that have had, say, hip replacements, knee replacements, and other things of that nature that would be maybe typical or more typical of an older population to help them kind of rehab through that? Do you work with those kinds of folks as well?
Yeah, I work with people with, knee replacements, hip replacements, and even, people that have total shoulder replacements. And usually this is due to some sort of arthritis in the joint where they've come to a point where they can't tolerate the pain anymore. And so they do a total joint replacement to help relieve that pain and improve their function. But we also have people that come to us prior to a joint replacement with arthritis, and we work with them on just increasing their strength, their mobility, kind of teaching them lifestyle modification and how to just manage their pain in a way where they can, manage it, continue doing what they are doing, and feel confident and in control of, their diagnoses. And so, I think a big piece of where physical therapy is moving into is that prevention piece, where we're starting to find through the literature and the research that there are ways to help prevent these symptoms from, getting worse and to help manage these symptoms.
I love that. Sounds like you're talking about arresting some of this and maybe even in some cases reversing, but putting off or even obviating the need for this a very invasive surgery such as a knee replacement, hip replacement, shoulder replacement. What kind of exercises, say, let's just say somebody that thinks they may be in for a knee replacement, what sort of work would you do with somebody to help them not be in a rush to get this or maybe not even need the surgery?
Yeah. So the big piece I would say is kind of working with them and assessing their movement and what kind of movement that they can do pain-free, and then working on just building up that movement. So if someone's coming in with, very minimal knee flexion and they can't really squat without pain, I'm not going to have them just, try to push through that. We'll find different exercises to do that are relatively pain-free. If they feel, a little dull ache here and there, that's okay. But just finding the movements and exercises that they can do at the moment and then working to build up from there. And so the important thing is being able to teach them the movements that are appropriate for them right now, and then slowly progressing them as they get stronger and as they achieve more motion and the ability to, move further, squat further, and then working towards that. And I think, a lot of people, if they get diagnosed with arthritis, their doctor tells them, you need to exercise, but, it's very vague and they don't know what to do. So they might go to, like an exercise class and they might overdo it and their pain might get worse. And so then they're like, this isn't helping me. This actually made it worse. And so then they just stop moving altogether. And we don't want that. So we want to show them, the right movements to do so that they're not flaring up their pain and having a negative experience with exercise.
I think we see a lot of that where a general physician, very well-meaning, will say, hey, you should exercise. I've been told that. What you need to do is exercise and eat better. But that, to your point, that's a very vague prescription and can mean a number of different things to different people. And clearly in an older population, that could be confusing. It could be intimidating. Maybe some of these folks don't have any background in exercise, wouldn't know where to start. So your point, if they ended up in a class or, that's a recipe for disaster, right? And then there's the possibility that doesn't work for me. I tried it and it didn't work for me because of my condition, et cetera. So it sounds like what you're describing then in this kind of preventative physical therapy setting is you're working on clearly mobility, but you're building strength. Is that fair?
Yeah, definitely.
So we're doing a progressive overload strength training. Just it's a matter of where we start and making sure we have the mobility, et cetera. I don't know if you're familiar with Mark Ripito. He's a big strength coach, but he's got a kind of famous saying that stronger people are harder to kill.
Yeah.
And there's something to be said to that, right? I mean, he's talking about big, strong athletes, but I've heard him speak and say, well, look, this bleeds over into other areas of your life as well, right? You're less likely to have a negative impact from a fall or an illness, et cetera, if you're stronger. So what are you had mentioned, like, for example, squatting. What are some of the other types of exercises that older people should be doing in order to increase strength, mobility, flexibility, et cetera?
Yeah. So, the squat is just a great basic one. And that can even just start from standing up from a chair and doing repetition of that. And the other one I really like is kind of that hip hinge deadlift pattern, because you're working on, so many aspects of strength there. And that's a great one, especially if someone does have, that knee pain or knee arthritis to start with, as opposed to the squat, because we're not really loading the knees as much, but we're still building so many of those muscles around the knee joint. And then, I think carries are great, and that can be done by anyone. So, a farmer's carry or a suitcase carry to help with grip strength, as well as just general, full body stability that way. There are so many exercises I like,
Yeah.
but incorporating some sort of like lateral movement is great as well. So, like a lateral lunge, mini lunge. Yeah. The program that I just released actually I had to choose things that, people could do at home without any equipment, but also kind of covered all the aspects of, squat, hinge, push, pull, carry. So if you, download that, you'll kind of see all those movements there, and it kind of progresses you throughout the 4 weeks of adding more repetition. And yeah.
Okay, so when I hear you talk about hinge, squats, lunge, push, pull, these are all very functional movements, right? that older adults, or really anybody, should be capable of in order to have a normal life, to be able to do. I think at the beginning of the show, we had said that take charge of your life and to empower you to do the things you want to do, whether that's go for a hike or go for a run or play with your grandkids or bend over and pick things up off the floor and then put them overhead in cupboards, etc. So this very functional form of fitness, it sounds like what you're describing.
Yeah.
Is that fair? Yeah. All right. Well, moving on a little bit from maybe the strength piece of it, I believe, and I might be wrong about this, but I believe it was last week National Fall Prevention Week. Does that ring a bell? I thought you might know that. Okay. Talk to us a little bit about the importance of balance in aging populations.
So balance is really important because it is how you kind of remain upright in your environment as you're moving around. And so there are a lot of different pieces to balance. Touch over a couple of them. So we have our, sensation through our feet telling us where we are, and that can be impaired if you have some sort of like neuropathy, from diabetes or from neurological impairment, and then you have your vision. So your eyes are kind of telling you where you are, and it's scanning your environment. You have your depth perception, your peripheral vision that gives you information on your surroundings and how to adjust to that. And then you have your vestibular system, which is your inner ear, and so that's also orienting you to where you are in space. And so you have these three components, and if one of them isn't working as well, then the other ones have to work harder. And so when you do have an impairment, either like in your vision or your sensation, then we try to work with you on making the other two stronger so that they can help compensate for the one that's impaired. And so that's a big piece of balance training for us. And then also just working on your different balance strategies. So you have like 5 different strategies, but there are 3 big ones. And so your ankle strategy is kind of where your ankles are detecting where you are in space. And that's kind of the first strategy that gets activated. And surprisingly, in older adults is one of the ones that they stop using first. And that's usually due to, tightness around that joint and also weakness. And then we move up to your hip. And so you have your hip strategy where that if the demands are too high for your ankle, then your hips will take over and help, kind of balance you out that way. And then the last one would be a step strategy. So if the ankle and the hip are overloaded there, then you're going to take a step to help recover your balance. And so just working on all 3 of those strategies and making sure that they can implement them correctly and at the right time.
So I hadn't thought of it that way. I mean, there's a lot that goes into our balance and our proprioception, where we are in space, et cetera. But I never thought about the kind of 3 different systems. Certainly your tactile feet to the floor, and then kind of that inner ear balance. And then I never thought of vision, but clearly that's a big, important part of balance. What are some exercises that people can do to help improve their balance, maybe in a preventative as opposed to if one of these systems is already gone, you're obviously strengthening the other 2. What are some more general kind of things that people can do?
Some easy ones to do are, so kind of, I call them ankle rocks. So you're going to stand by a counter or something sturdy, just in case you lose your balance. And you're just wanting to kind of rock back onto your heels as far as you can, and then rock forward kind of onto the balls of your feet. As far as you can. And so you're just kind of making, like, if you think about it, your body is going to be straight up and down. You're not going to bend at the hip. And you're just kind of making like this big cone with your body, and the apex of the cone is your feet. And so
you're working on the ankle there. Is that right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. And then another thing you can do is kind of stand close to a wall, and then you're going to lean forward as far as you can until you can't go any further. And that's where your stepping reaction comes in. And so you can do that, forward, backwards, side to side, and work on that reaction of where your limit is, and then taking a step to correct that. And then for like the sensation part of it, if you have like one of those blue foam pads, you can stand on that to do exercises. Or if you don't have that, just like a soft pillow, or I've seen people have like a yoga mat and they kind of place objects under the mat and then cover it and then try to walk over that to create like more of an uneven surface. So just a couple ideas of how to work on balance that way. And then I think, those functional movements, you can also incorporate balance into that. So like with the lunge, you can do, like a forward backward lunge where you're going forward and then having to step back onto that one leg. And so that incorporates some balance as well. And then even like, a deadlift or a squat, we can progress that to like a single leg. And that challenges your balance a little bit more.
It sure does. Yeah.
Yeah. And then of course, just, single leg balance and then challenging that with, head turns or eyes closed or, moving, manipulating an object with your arms are great ones as well.
Yeah, those are all great ideas for practicing balance. And I have noticed that balance becomes a whole lot harder when you close your eyes. You had mentioned looking different directions, closing your eyes, and that does make it more challenging. Moving on from balance, let's talk a little bit about conditioning. You've got a couple of posts on your Instagram about HIIT, which is high intensity interval training. What is appropriate HIIT for older individuals, and how might they incorporate that into their lifestyle? And you might want to start by maybe defining that for folks that might not be familiar with that term.
HIIT is high intensity interval training. And so essentially what you're going to be doing is taking an activity, and it can be, you can start with just walking, and you're going to want to do, intervals of high intensity versus low intensity. And so, if you go to my page and look at the post, you can see a chart. It's a rate of perceived exertion chart. And it's, 0 to 10. And 0 is kind of like, you're just laying around, not doing anything. And 10 would be you're exerting yourself as hard as you can. And so for a high intensity, you want to kind of be between that like 6 and 10 area. And if you're just starting out, you can do between like 6 and 8. And then the low intensity would be anything lower than that. And so what you could do is walk for a minute at, that high intensity, 6 to 8 or 6 to 10. And then either, just stop completely or, walk a little slower at a lower intensity under that 6 and 5 range. And then, you do that off and on for X amount of time. You can do this with all different kinds of exercises as well. So I think I had one where you were squatting for like 45 seconds, and then you were resting for 30 to 45 seconds, and then you were doing another exercises, let's say like a push-up, and then resting. And so this can be done in so many different ways. And so like when I was working with kind of lower level patients, they were mostly in bed, so we could do like bed exercises and do that high intensity exercise that way. And so it can be adaptable to pretty much anyone.
So that's interesting. Obviously, I think of high intensity intervals as running all out sprints or assault bikes or horrible things like that. But you're right; it can be. I suppose it's dependent on the person that you're working with. Talk to us a little bit about why that's important. Why is it important for us to incorporate that type of training as we age?
It's really important to incorporate some sort of high intensity training, especially if you're not doing a lot of exercise. And as you get older, you kind of can fall into this activity level where you're mostly just kind of walking around the house, maybe going out to get some groceries. And, that's kind of at a maybe 3 or 4 intensity. And as we get older, and this is a normal aspect of aging that happens to all of us, but our cardiovascular system and our respiratory system, they start to decline. And in order to offset those changes, high intensity training is a great way to help kind of maintain what you have and just kind of slow down that decline in those systems.
That makes sense. I can picture a person, especially maybe in an assisted living where there's a routine to life, right? Or maybe even just living independently at home where your movement patterns are the same and they're at the same low intensity day in and day out. How varying that intensity would be important for long-term health. So let's switch gears a little bit. We've talked a little bit about exercise, about the importance of becoming stronger, and the importance of some conditioning. Really, is what we're talking about when we talk about things like HIIT. What are your thoughts on recovery for older folks? We touched on this a little bit, but specifically as we age and where your folks are coming to you and now they're doing these exercises that maybe they haven't done in the past, what are some important recovery strategies for this population?
Yeah, so I think the big one is education. So a lot of these adults, especially women, they haven't ever really worked out or done any kind of high intensity exercise before, and so they don't really know what sore muscles feel like. And so just making sure to educate them like, hey, we did some high intensity stuff here today, and you might feel this achiness in your muscles, and it might hurt to touch, might feel like it's a little bit more swollen, and that's completely normal, and that should go away in a couple days. I've heard stories where a PT was working with someone, and they did a bunch of sit to stands, and the next day or that night actually her quads were just so painful and sore. She thought something was wrong, and she actually called an ambulance to take her to the hospital.
Oh no, yeah, that's a
And
pretty serious reaction to a
um,
workout, huh?
yeah, and so just educating them on that piece of it,
Hmm.
that's completely normal. And that's actually how we're going to, build up strength. But also just kind of knowing, who you're working with. And if it's someone that, you don't think is going to be very receptive to that, then kind of toning in and dialing it down the first, couple of sessions and, work on a more gradual build. So it's just really seeing who you're working with and kind of judging on kind of their personality and their history and all that on how you want to proceed working with them. And then the other big thing I would say is making sure that they're getting enough nutrition. So as you get older, your taste buds actually change, and you don't really taste food quite the same, and so it's not as appealing to you. And so older adults typically eat less, and they're also don't tend to get those triggers for hunger and thirst as much as a younger adult. And so just making sure that they're eating enough and getting enough protein to help recover is really important.
I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to, my next question actually was on the nutrition piece. So clearly that would be important. It's important whether you're working out or not, and for all folks, but as you're aging and maybe just now starting to get into some sort of a physical therapy or a workout routine, prioritizing your protein and prioritizing a healthy whole foods based diet would clearly be a big part of your recovery strategy and just your wellness strategy, I would think. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, definitely.
Roughly how much exercise does an older person need? Let's say, and maybe not even so much in the physical therapy sense, but people that are aging, should they be working out every day at a low intensity, every other day at a higher intensity, or a mix and match? What are your thoughts on how much exercise do older adults need?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the guidelines, and I can't remember what association this was from, but are for a minimum of 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise a week. And they've actually shown that if you increase that to 300 minutes, you can get further health benefits from that. So the minimum is 150 minutes of moderate intensity. And if you like to do high intensity, you can cut that in half to 75. And then to kind of get the most benefit, aim for 300 minutes a week of moderate intensity. And then they also recommend 2 to 3 times a week of some sort of strength and resistance training. And that's going to cover full body. So you want to target kind of the big major muscle groups of the body when you're doing that resistance training.
And when you say resistance training, pretty sure all our listeners are going to know, but you're referring to weight training,
Yeah.
some kind of loaded training typically.
Mhm.
And I know we talked a little bit about some of these patterns and movements, but certainly squatting and deadlifting and some type of pressing and some type of pulling would be the basis of that. Is that fair in terms of
Yeah.
strength? And We talked about stronger people are harder to kill, and we talked about the importance of that. But why is it important for somebody, say, that comes to you, maybe they're in their 70s and have zero background in health or in any kind of physical fitness? Why would it be important for that person to become stronger, specifically to maybe lift weights? If they come to you and you're going to put a barbell into this person's hand for maybe the first time in their life, why is that important?
As we get older, we start to lose muscle mass. So after the age of 30, you start to lose, depending on the person, between 3 to 8% per decade. And then once you hit 60, I think that increases to 15% a decade. And so from 60 to 80, you're losing about 30% of your muscle mass, just, normal age-related changes. And so by weight training, you're offsetting that natural loss in muscle mass. And so essentially, the earlier you start, the better off you are. So if you build up a lot of muscle mass when you're young, and you're losing that as you get older, even if you do stop lifting, then you're starting out with more to begin with. And
Yeah.
so it's definitely great to start at any age, but even at 70, it's not too late. You can still build more muscle mass and then even, prevent that decline of further loss. And that's so important because, you need this muscle in order to do, just kind of daily activities like getting up out of a chair. There are so many of my clients that can't get out of a chair without using their arms. And so, that's just lack of strength in those lower leg muscles. That carries over to, fall prevention as well. So, if you're stronger, you're able to kind of move your body better. And so you're less likely to fall in that scenario. So, a lot of really great pieces of, weight training. And it's definitely never too late to start.
Yeah, I love that you said that it's never too late to start, and I think that we see that all around us. I've had some guests on this podcast that didn't start weight training until they were in their late 60s, going into their 70s. So certainly hear of people starting later than that. And to your point that we lose muscle mass as we age, clearly nobody's going to win the war against time and aging, right? We all have that same fate in common. But we can certainly take drastic steps. There are very many men and women that are great ambassadors for healthy aging that are putting on muscle and actually building muscle in later years as opposed to losing muscle. So there is that example out there. Certainly, I'd like to see more of those examples than kind of the norm, right? I think that we look at aging as kind of inevitable. That's what's supposed to happen. You're supposed to lose strength. Your health is supposed to decline. And to some degree, I suppose there's some truth in that, but a lot more of it, I think, is in our hands as individuals and as folks like you that are out there working with individuals to kind of help change that perception a little bit. All right. Well, what advice would you have for an older person who maybe listens to this podcast and thinks to themselves, well, that's all fine and good, but that doesn't apply to me. I'm too far gone, or I don't have any background in that. What would you say to somebody who's maybe intimidated or is convinced that maybe physical therapy or strength training or any of the things we've been talking about isn't for them? How would you gently persuade them that it's not too late to start and there is a place to start and a path to progress?
Yeah, definitely. So I think there are some great programs out there, and there aren't programs all over the country right now. But I think, as we kind of start moving into this prevention and this working with older adults to, weight train and weight lift, that we'll have more kind of programs and trainers and therapists that can provide these services. But I think I would just say, give it a shot. What do you have to lose, right? If you go and see someone and you work with them and it's, terrible, then, at least you tried. But if you do go see someone and, you end up, loving it and you've kind of realized that you can do more than you thought you could, that's the biggest thing with a lot of my clients is that, I'll tell them, hey, you're going to do this. And then a lot of times they'll be like, really? Like, you think I can do that? And I'll say, yeah, let's give it a try. What's the worst that can happen? I'm right here with you. We can modify it after, but given what you've done and what you've shown me you can do, like, I think this is the next step and I think you're ready for it. And then they'll do it and they'll be like, oh my God, like, I can't believe I did that. And so, finding, and if it's intimidating, finding maybe like a friend that, can do it with you and you can just have that support there. Looking for like a class that is, led by, experts in older adults and training with the older adult. Yeah. So just kind of looking for those resources and then just, going out and doing it and giving it a try. I know that like when I first started lifting, I didn't really lift throughout high school or college. And then when I wanted to play, professional women's rugby, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to put on some more weight, put on some more muscle in order to be able to compete. And so, I had no idea what I was doing. I would just kind of, we don't really learn a lot about exercise prescription in PT school. And so, I looked up, everything I could on the internet and even like, watching the videos and then like going to the gym, you're like, what do they do? Did they bend their knees and did they pull like this? And so like on my phone and looking at the video and I think just knowing that everyone starts somewhere, right? Like we all started somewhere where we had no idea what we were doing and just kind of, either educated ourselves or sought out a coach to help teach us how to do these things. And then, yeah, so I think just going out and doing it and not feeling, embarrassed that, you don't know what you're doing because we were all there.
And that's well spoken. I think that there is an intimidation factor that we have to consider for older adults, especially if we're asking them to get into an environment where they're clearly going to be uncomfortable, like you said, maybe even embarrassed, and help people work through that. You mentioned that the encouragement that you give people to try something that they don't think they can do, and then they actually do it, and how that might manifest. It's going to make them stronger, physically stronger, and that's fantastic. But it manifests in other ways of their life as well, right? It builds that confidence and that competence, and that they become more capable of living the life that they want to live. So all great stuff. And hopefully, like you said, I think you alluded to, there's more and more people getting into this space. So I know on this particular podcast, we're still pretty young, but I've only had 2 guests that have been under 50. I mean, most of my guests are because it is the over 50 health and wellness podcast. Most of my guests are older, right? They're older athletes or people who've had some kind of transformation story. And there's only been 2 of you that have been under 50, and both of you have a passion for working with older adults. And I see more and more of that happening. And there does seem to be the tide is slowly turning where there's more and more people helping to fight ageism and to help people see that aging while aging itself is inevitable, poor aging doesn't have to be, right? We can certainly turn that around. So hats off to you and folks like you that are helping to make that happen. So what's next for you? What do you have? Have any projects or ideas for either your business or your personal life?
Yeah. So, right now, I'm actually working Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. And so Tuesday, Thursdays are kind of like my days to, work on my personal stuff. And so I'm working on starting like my own mobile practice. So I'll go to, someone's home or their gym to work with them. And then so, either physical therapy or doing that wellness performance aspect of it where, they might not have any, significant impairments, but they want to just kind of learn how to, take care of themselves as they age. And then looking to work with sort of like a CrossFit gym and providing classes for 60, 65 plus adults. Because like we talked about that piece where, they might feel uncomfortable going into like a commercial gym or even stepping into a CrossFit gym. And so kind of creating a community where people can feel comfortable coming in to, do weight training and do kind of CrossFit style workouts where they're lifting. And then also knowing that I'm there to help modify the movements and that they're, doing everything safely and progressing appropriately. And so those are kind of the 2 big things that I'm working towards right now. It's a little hard with, the pandemic going on and all that, and then, digitally, I want to try to provide more resources. And so I have my Instagram page right now, and then just finished that workout plan, and then thinking about doing like a course or some sort of like webinar type thing on different aspects of aging. So that's all kind of just in my head right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, working on making those come to fruition. So yeah.
Well, all that sounds fantastic. And as a CrossFitter myself, I tell you, I love the idea of doing like a master. Well, masters technically is pretty young, but like a 60 plus maybe CrossFit, because then you're really into some very functional type movements. Like you said, you can scale that for whatever the person's needs are. So absolutely love that. You had mentioned a little bit about getting more into the online space. Do you take virtual clients, or is everything pretty much still more one-on-one for you, or how does that work?
Yeah. So right now, I do take virtual clients. So if it's going to be like a physical therapy type client, then it'll only be in the state of California. Whereas if it's like a wellness, like an exercise programming type situation, then that can be anyone that can reach out. But for
Okay.
like physical therapy specific, it's limited to the state of California.
And that's, I'm guessing, a license issue?
Yeah. Yeah. So you just have to be licensed in the state that the
You're
person is
practicing, or the person
living.
is. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. So we know you have a great Instagram account, and I'll certainly drop that in the show notes. Is there any other way you would like people to connect with you?
Yeah. So I'm finishing up my website now,
Mhm.
but it's resilientagingpt.com.
Okay. And I'll drop that in the show notes as well. And so is that coming soon, or is that available
Yeah,
now for
that
folks
should
to visit?
be within like the next week or
Okay.
so.
Oh, great. Okay. So absolutely, this will air 2 weeks from now. So I'll go
Okay,
ahead and drop that into the show notes.
perfect.
All right, Serena, thanks so much for coming on the show. I applaud the work that you're doing. I think that's fantastic that folks like you are out there carrying the banner for healthy aging, and certainly wish you all the best in all your future endeavors.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, that's our show for today, folks. If you enjoyed today's episode, please tell your friends, and please consider subscribing and giving us a 5-star review. All the show notes and much more are available at our website at silver-edge.com. That's silver-edge.com. So until next time, stay strong.